Hello and welcome along to the latest edition of the RacingNews365.com Formula One podcast. My name is Michael Butterworth and I'm joined as ever by Dieter Rencken, Editorial Director of RacingNews365. Dieter, as ever, welcome to the show. We're recording this on the Monday after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, the final race of the 2022 season. I don't think the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix itself will go down as one for the ages, but it's a fantastic facility, a fantastic event, a bit of an end-of-term atmosphere, and you yourself got into the action as well, didn't you?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, let's just address your comment that it won't go down as one for the ages. Absolutely not. But then equally, unless it's been a title showdown, it never really has been a Grand Prix for the ages. I mean, that's the sort of price that we pay for having these flat, featureless kind of circuits. They have tried to improve overtaking. They've tried to improve the racing. Obviously, the new regulations were introduced to try and assist there as well. But fundamentally, the nuances in this particular event were not whether people are overtaking left, right, and centre. It was actually who's going to finish ahead, Mercedes or Ferrari for second place in the championship, Alpine or McLaren for fourth place, Alfa Romeo ahead of Aston Martin. That's really where it was at this weekend. And so from that perspective, I do believe that it delivered because our focus was actually on what is going on there. Equally, we had the situation with Sergio Perez and Charles Leclerc, both of them hoping to finish as runners-up in the championship. Again, there was that sort of intrigue, that drama. How would Ferrari play it? Because obviously they've got one eye on the Constructors' Championship and the other eye on Charles Leclerc finishing second. Mercedes only had to worry about beating Ferrari. So all in, I thought it was actually an enthralling kind of race. I really did.
And talking about some of the off-track action, you managed to grab yourself a lift with Valtteri Bottas in an Alfa Romeo Giulia around the circuit. How was that?
Absolutely fantastic. I mean, I've really always had a lot of time for Valtteri. I think he's a great guy. We've always got on pretty well. And the opportunity came up. In fact, I was talking to Cristiano Fiorio at the Alfa. He's manager of the Formula One program for Alfa Romeo. And I was talking to him in Austin, and I said, I'd really love to have a hot lap in one of the Giulia GTAs, and if possible with Valtteri. And he said, well, he'll see what he could do to set it up, working together with Katarina Rees, the communications manager for the team, and Cristiano. Between them, they managed to hook it together, and it really was wonderful. I mean, sitting next to a Formula One driver on a Grand Prix circuit, the guy didn't go 10/10ths, of course not. Only because I'd asked him to try and explain his way around the circuit. The result is actually on our YouTube channel. So for all our listeners and readers, please go and avail yourself of it. It really was a lot of fun, really great fun.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to do a hot lap around Abu Dhabi myself back in 2018 when Bernd Mailander drove me around in a Mercedes. And it's an amazing experience. And you can see why people pay handsomely for the privilege of doing so. But talking about the race, you mentioned the big battle, the main battle towards the front of the field was whether Charles Leclerc or Sergio Perez would finish second in the Drivers' Championship. They came into this race absolutely deadlocked. As it was, Charles Leclerc won out. He finished second. Sergio Perez only finished third. So Charles Leclerc got that second place in the standings by the end of the race as well. And there was some talk that maybe Verstappen, who did his by now customary trick of leading away from pole position and disappearing into the distance a little bit, there was talk that maybe he should have helped Perez a little bit and maybe backed Charles Leclerc up. Shades of 2016 when Lewis Hamilton tried to do this to Nico Rosberg. Do you think that was something that might have been an option there for Red Bull to try?
I think that's a very, very risky strategy for a non-championship purpose. Whatever happened, Checo at best would finish second. And, in real terms, with all due respect to all the runners-up that we've had in the history of Formula One, nobody actually knows who actually came second. And, of course, it's a personal tick for the driver. The team, of course, would like to say we had a 1-2, but in real terms, it doesn't really matter. And that's a very, very risky strategy because Red Bull would not have known exactly how competitive Charles could be. And all you got to do is just give him one glimpse and he could have been passed, and that's it. And they could have lost the win. So, I think that ultimately it was down to Checo to do what he could. It obviously wasn't good enough, but that, of course, is the way that the entire season has played out. Let's not forget, he has been rather magnanimous with his points. We look back at Spain, where he was asked to step aside. We look at Baku. So there have been races where possibly the team played it too safe for Max, of course, not knowing how it would pan out. But in retrospect, they could have let Checo win races where he'd had to move across. And if they'd done that early in the season, they wouldn't have gotten to the situation at the end of the season.
Well, talking about Ferrari, we've hauled them over the coals quite a few times on this podcast for all the questionable strategy calls and operational mistakes that they've made over the course of the year. But I think credit where it's due, because they definitely got this strategy call right. Charles Leclerc only made the one pit stop. Perez made two, and ultimately that was probably his downfall, because he lost a lot of time trying to overtake back markers and such, and wasn't able to close up to Leclerc. And Red Bull had really looked quicker than Ferrari all weekend long. Red Bull were first and second in qualifying, Ferrari third and fourth. So I think for all the criticism that has been leveled at Ferrari for the strategy mishaps they've had over the year, it's time to give them props when they definitely get something right, like they did here.
Absolutely. And, but ultimately, let's be frank. A team should always get its strategy right every single time. That's what they're in business for. But ultimately, yes, they called this one absolutely correctly. I was speaking to Christian Horner last night. He said that Checo had his wear on the right-hand front had been a lot heavier than they thought it would be, which is why they had to put him in for the second stop. But equally, Ferrari kept everybody guessing. They weren't sure whether Charles would actually have to make a splash and dash towards the end. And, fair cop to them. They got it right. He's got his second place in the championship. Ferrari salvaged some respectability by finishing second. Had they been beaten by Mercedes into third, of course, that would have been cause for big drama. So all in, yes, when it counted, Ferrari got it 100% right. I say 100% for what they wanted to do, which is finish second and ensure Charles's a second place in the championship. Yes, they did.
Well, staying with Ferrari now, because in the lead up to the Grand Prix, there was some rumours about Mattia Binotto's future, suggesting that his future at Ferrari might be a little bit insecure. There were suggestions that maybe Fred Vasseur would move to Ferrari from Alfa Romeo to replace him. What's your read of that situation?
Well, first of all, to move somebody out of a position, you need to ensure that you have somebody who is better to replace him. And one has to look at the backdrop of all this. I mean, ultimately, in 2020, July 2020, John Elkann, the president of Ferrari, basically said that they were writing off 21 because they were rolling over the then 2020 cars because of the COVID pandemic. Very small changes, but the cars were the life was being extended by a year, so to speak. And at the time, he said, so we're writing off 2021. However, for 22, the team's objectives is to be competitive. Now, let's not forget, they fought for pole positions. They fought for and were successful in taking victories, both drivers. Let's not forget, they do have second place in the championship. Let's not forget their driver, Charles Leclerc, is second in the championship. I mean, short of winning everything in sight, and let's be honest, nobody else has either except Red Bull, they've done everything that's required of them to be competitive. So I was a bit bemused when I heard these rumors, and, I'm sort of hearing stories, one never knows with the Italian media, but fundamentally I'm hearing that somewhere along the line, a seed was planted by somebody, possibly sources close to Vasseur, who realized that with Audi having confirmed their slow takeover of the Sauber team, which of course races at Alfa Romeo at the moment until the end of next year, but with the gradual takeover, it's possible that Fred Vasseur could find himself out of a job at that team. And I'm hearing that maybe sources close to him had started planting seeds. The Italian media ran with this, and the next thing, it was fait accompli. Will it happen? Who knows with Ferrari? Who knows in such circumstances? You know, John Elkann may, for all we know, have called Mattia Binotto in and given him his notice. We don't know. But ultimately, I was very, very bemused when I saw that and heard that, because I believe that they've done what the task that they were set to do.
Yeah, I mean, from the awful year that they had in 2020, if you look at the trajectory since then has been ever increasing. You know, they got third in the championship last year. They didn't win any races, but then first race of this year, or winning 2 of the first 3 races of this year, and for a while looking as if they were going to challenge for the title. It's definitely been an upward trajectory since then. But I've always wondered about Binotto, whether he's a bit of a reluctant leader in that team, because, you know, he's come through from the engineering side of things. He's not come through from a business sort of background like the likes of Arriva Bene or Marco Mattiacci or Stefano Domenicali had. And I just wonder with Binotto whether he would rather just be focusing on the engineering side of things rather than all the other things you have to do as a team principal, which inevitably takes time away from that.
Well, you know, you say that, Michael. I mean, all we've got to do is look at the record books, and I can show you lots of engineers who've been very, very successful as team principals. You know, one of the most successful in the history of Formula One was Ron Dennis. I mean, he was a technician. He started off as a mechanic and worked his way up from there. We've had others as well. I mean, there is no blueprint for a team principal. They're all completely different. Frank Williams was a super duper salesman. You know, as I say, Ron Dennis was a mechanic who worked his way up. Christian Horner had been a driver who became a team owner. So there is no sort of blueprint for a team principal. And ultimately, it's the man who best, well, I say the person who best gets the team together to deliver on the combined objectives. And, you know, I don't believe that it matters whether you're a salesman or a mechanic or whatever. It's actually leadership qualities that are required, not degrees.
Well, talking about team principals, one who has had a huge amount of success in recent years is Toto Wolff. And obviously Mercedes falling back this year from the very high standards that they had set themselves in previous years, and falling back down to earth from last time out in Brazil, really, when they had that amazing 1-2 result. We wondered if maybe Mercedes were finally back to the front. In fact, you spoke on the podcast that we did after Brazil, suggesting that, you know, this was a circuit-specific circumstance, and it proved to be so in Abu Dhabi because they were very firmly the third fastest team. Lewis Hamilton said that the bouncing was back with a vengeance and that he was very, very glad to see the back of the W13. And so it was a bit of a fall from grace for Mercedes from where they'd been just a couple of weeks ago.
Yes, absolutely. But just to digress slightly, if we take Toto, again, we have, in his case, you know, we have somebody who's an entrepreneur. And, you know, he's run a very, very successful operation for the last 7 or 8 years. So, you know, equally, they can come from anywhere, provided they have the leadership skills that are required to lead a Formula One team in this day and age. Getting back to Mercedes, yes, I did fear that it was circuit-specific. And equally, you know, let's not forget that Red Bull was nowhere in Brazil, and yet they were way up front in Abu Dhabi. So we could argue that was circuit specific for them in Brazil. And I think this is the thing about the cars, the new generation of cars, the new era of Formula One cars, that there are so many different concepts that they use their tires differently. They use their aero differently. They have, some have drag factors. And because of that, we have them playing to certain circuits better than others, which of course is great news for all of us. You know, as fans, we'd like to see preferably 22 races, 22 different winners. Of course, that will never happen, but that would be sort of first prize. So I'm not surprised that Mercedes did suffer here, particularly if we have a look at the history on some of the sort of smoother circuits in the past. And Abu Dhabi is one of those. Yes, the Yas Marina circuit is one of those.
Well, at the top of the podcast, you made reference to some of the very tight battles in the Drivers' and Constructors' Championships that we had coming into to Abu Dhabi. One particularly tight battle was the one for sixth in the Constructors' Championship between Alfa Romeo and Aston Martin. And Alfa Romeo just managed to squeak into that sixth place. They actually finished level on 55 points, the two teams. But by virtue of Valtteri Bottas's fifth place in Imola, On countback, Alfa Romeo had the higher or had the better result of the two. So that puts them in 6th place. And we spoke just a few days ago, actually, had an extra edition of the podcast where we discussed the financials in Formula One, the prize money that is divvied up between each of the teams. And so Alfa Romeo, in finishing 6th instead of 7th, they've got something like a $10 to $12 million windfall. And that's absolutely fantastic for a team that's not operating close to the budget cap.
Absolutely. And, this, I think, is a crucial thing here that Fred Vasseur told me in Austin that they were not at the budget cap yet, that he was hoping to get them there next year. And, of course, this fillip of $10 or $12 million will make all the difference to them. And I think because of that, we could see them rise to even greater heights next year, which will be fascinating to watch. Of course, the downside to this is that Alfa Romeo leave at the end of next year. So there's the team gearing up for potentially its most successful season in recent years. And, of course, Alfa Romeo is leaving. But, that's the luck of the draw. That was a management decision. And, they just have to accept that and live with it. But I do believe that the team generally has performed very, very well. They came in at the beginning of the year with about the only car that was on the weight limit. They were marginalized slightly by all the other teams pushing for an increase in weight limit. They were outvoted, and so the other teams got that break, which played against them slightly. They'd also, by building the car to the weight limit, had, in my opinion, taken a bit of a risk on reliability, where maybe a certain item should have been a bit stronger, but it would have weighed 500 gram more or something. So they tried to go to the weight limit, and therefore they've suffered a bit of unreliability. I think for next year, the car will be reliable. I think for next year, with the additional money that they'll get, they will have a better budget. And I think that it's a team to watch for next year. And if I may be slightly sarcastic, one of the things that Fred Vasseur said this year was, well, we had two problems. One was called reliability and the other one was called Latifi, a sort of tongue-in-cheek reference to a couple of accidents that their drivers had been involved with Nicholas Latifi. Well, of course, we know that Nicholas had his last race on Sunday yesterday. So that factor won't be there either. I do see Sauber being very strong in the midfield next year. Yes, absolutely. Sauber, of course, being Alfa Romeo, that's the Sauber, the company name, and Alfa Romeo is the entry name at the moment with that sponsorship.
Well, Alfa Romeo have got continuity on the driver front as well next year. Valtteri Bottas and Zhou Guanyu staying with the Hinwil side for another season. And the team that they just edged into 6th place, or demoted to 7th place rather, Aston Martin, their driver Sebastian Vettel retiring after the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, 299 Grand Prix, 53 race wins, 4 World Championship titles. A bit of an end of an era here, Dieter. What are you going to remember Sebastian Vettel most for in Formula One?
I think probably, and he referred to this himself, that he was remembered or will be remembered as a good person, and that's what he hoped for. And I must agree with that. Whenever I've dealt with Sebastian, he's been unfailingly polite. I see him in the paddock and he smiles or waves or whatever the case may be. When I've asked him a question, he's taken time to answer it properly. He's been polite. Unlike some of his peers who, you see them in the paddock and they just ignore you until one day when they want you to write something nice about them or something. Sebastian has always been, it's obviously a product of the sort of person he is, but he's always been unfadingly courteous, polite, considerate. I think the fact that he's got these interests outside of Formula One, which bemused some people, for example, his B hotels. He's on the environmental scene at the moment. He's also very much into diversity, etc. And this is just really the sort of person that he is. And frankly, I got the feeling that towards the end of his Formula One career, he felt personally a bit conflicted. Here he was driving these very fast, loud, noisy cars, admittedly with hybrid, but let's be honest, it is still use of fossil fuels. And he was campaigning on the other side for some of the greener initiatives. And, I spoke to him about it once and he said, but this is what I do for a living. And he didn't seem to be that persuasive about this. And I think that ultimately he had to have a look at it and turn around and say, what am I going to do? These are my core values. Formula One and motor racing doesn't really fit into those for the future, and I'm out of here. And, hats off to him. He's done it. He's had a great career. He will go down as a legend, a 4-time world champion. And equally, he can now concentrate on all the other interests in his life.
Do you think we will see him back in Formula One? There's been a lot of people suggesting that over the weekend, including people saying that directly to his face. Obviously, we had Fernando Alonso come back after 2 years away. Will we ever see Sebastian Vettel in a Formula One car again?
We had that with Alain Prost, for example. We've had it with a few drivers. We had it with Kimi Räikkönen, as you correctly say. We had it with Fernando Alonso. The interesting thing is that all three of these are champions, and they came back. But I think that ultimately, Sebastian has taken his decision. I don't think that we're going to see him back. Of course, he could prove me wrong, and I'd be delighted for as many fans if he does prove me wrong. But I honestly don't believe that. I think one morning he's going to wake up and he'll work out exactly what he wants to do with his life, and that will be away from motor racing. We'll probably still see him in the paddock. I think he's a dyed-in-the-wool enthusiast. I think he'll be back. I think we'll see him around. But ultimately, I don't think we'll see him in a car.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's probably it for Sebastian Vettel in Formula One. But he's obviously a man with many interests beyond the lighted stage, and it will certainly be very, very interesting to see what he does do next. But as we look towards 2023 now, the 2023 grid was finally confirmed when Logan Sargent, who was driving an F2 this year, he got enough super license points to be confirmed as a Williams driver for 2023. So the grid is confirmed now because we know that Mick Schumacher is out at Haas and Nico Hülkenberg is coming back to Formula One to take his place. Your thoughts, Dieter, on both of those moves? First, let's start with the new boy, Logan Sargent. He's going to be driving for Williams next year.
Well, I think the crucial thing for Formula One is that Logan Sargent is American, so there'll be some American interest in the grid. We haven't had an American driver since 2015. I know that Liberty have been trying very, very hard, and so incidentally have Haas F1 team, who of course are an American team. They race under an American entrance license. So various people have tried to pull American drivers in. We had the Red Bull initiative trying to get Colton Herta in. We've had McLaren with Pato Award, with Alex Palou. So, all over the place, we do have this transatlantic interest. But the first one that's actually been able to fulfill that is Williams with Logan Sargent. And I'm very, very pleased for Joske Pieter that he's been able to pull it off. Of course, one has to question what would have happened had Logan not qualified for super license points, because Joske Pieter said quite openly, I don't have a plan B. Now, and in motor racing, as we know, and we can ask Jack Doohan, who lost a wheel this weekend, and that was the end of his race. This could so easily have happened to Logan, and he wouldn't have had the super license. But ultimately, I'm very, very pleased that this has happened. I think it bodes well for Formula One. I think it bodes well for Formula One in America, and I think it bodes very well for Williams, who, in recent years have had to look at drivers who maybe didn't quite fit the bill but came along with some sort of support package. And I'm looking here again, I'm sorry to say this about Nicky, but Nicky Latifi, I think we know that ultimately his drive was as a result of some parental push as much as him qualifying for a super license in the first place.
Perfect timing for Formula One when we've got 3 races in America next year with the addition of Las Vegas. But let's move on to the American team now, Haas. Mick Schumacher out and Nico Hülkenberg in. One of the worst kept secrets in Formula One over recent weeks. It had been widely expected that Hülkenberg would come back. How do you see this situation, Dieter? Is this the right move for Haas?
I know that Günther has been after experience. When Haas came in, they came in with, when I say experienced drivers, they had Romain Grosjean and they had Esteban Gutierrez, both of whom had some experience. Roman, of course, a lot more than Esteban, but both were experienced. Then he went for Kevin Magnussen, who, of course, was also well experienced. And the team was sort of fighting for 5th, 6th, occasionally 7th in the championship. They were doing okay. And then, of course, they had the 2021 season where they took Mick Schumacher, total rookie. They took Nikita Mazepin, total rookie, to the degree that they didn't even know whether he qualified for a super license. And so they've had these rookies in there, and the result was plain to see last year. Mick had a couple of accidents this year, and I think that ultimately Gene Haas and Günther said, all right, maybe Nico will not be able to win a race for us in our car. We accept that, but we do believe that he'll be able to bring home the points. And again, let's not forget with the revised prize money structure, the higher up you finish, the lot more money you get than back in the 2016, 17, 18 sort of era. So from that perspective, I think that Günther sort of said, all right, we'll take a safe pair of hands as opposed to a rookie who may ultimately be able to mature into a good driver, but they need the results now, not next year or the year after or whatever. In addition to that, the relationship between the Schumacher family and the Haas constellation always seemed to be a bit edgy. Ultimately, Haas and Günther in particular were always a bit uneasy about the focus that was on Mick because of the surname. I believe that they didn't get on too well from a management perspective either. Mick brought along his managers because the family has got a management team around them, and they came along and they would be there and they'd be questioning things. And ultimately, I think it's just best that the two parties go their own separate way. Mick can try and rebuild his career, and Haas can get back to running in the midfield, which is where Günther plans to run.
And there's been talk that Mick's going to be taking a reserve driver role at Mercedes, along with, Daniel Ricciardo. It looks as if he's going to take a reserve driver role at Red Bull now. Can Mick take heart from Nico Hülkenberg himself? Because he spent 3 years out of Formula One, out of a regular drive, and he's managed to get himself back into the fray. So is there hope yet for Mick Schumacher in Formula One?
I don't think that he should write off a Formula One career, but I think ultimately what we mustn't forget is that Nico was out of Formula One for 3 years. Yes, absolutely he was, but he'd had a pretty solid career to that point. And I don't think that we can say the same about Mick Schumacher with much conviction. And therefore, ultimately we've got to turn around. We've got to say that Mick actually needs to do a lot more than what he's done so far to take heart from this. Would a reserve driver role with Mercedes help him? Well, it would certainly put him into a cockpit doing simulation work and whatever else. Maybe he can rebuild his career that way. We saw that Nick de Vries, who'd done that for Mercedes, has now got the drive of the AlphaTauri. So I think that is the right move for Mick. And ultimately, if he can perform in the simulator, then maybe Mercedes give him a Friday run, a rookie run or whatever. Who knows? And under the circumstances, he may just make it.
Well, we're just about running out of time now, but Dieter, your final thoughts, please, on the 2022 season. This is the new era of Formula One. This was, the cars had the biggest regulation changes that we've seen probably since 2009, with the aim of closer racing. How do you think this season's gone? How do you think this season is going to be remembered?
I do believe that the new era ticked most of the boxes. Certainly the cars were cheaper and also cheaper to run, because let's not forget that everybody put together cars with completely new concepts and technologies on a budget cap of about $140 million, which is unheard of in the past. Overtakes are up by, I believe the official figure is about 25%. Even if the actual figure is marginally below that, so what? Overtakes are definitely up. As we said earlier on, we had fighting for second place between a Red Bull and a Ferrari driver. We had fighting for second place in the Constructors' Championship between Mercedes and Ferrari. In both instances, all the way down to the wire, the very last lap of the last Grand Prix. We had a fight to the wire for fourth and fifth places with Alpine and and McLaren. We had the same for sixth place with Aston Martin and Alfa Romeo, two evocative, hallowed automotive names. Yeah, all in, I think that Formula One, if we look at the crowd numbers, they're on an upward trajectory. The TV numbers are going north. You know, everything seems to be going in the right direction for Formula One. We've got more sponsors. It seems to be coming together. I think the critical thing now is to ensure that it stays together, that it's not a flash in the pan, that it's not a Netflix thing, and that once the newcomers to Formula One buy Netflix, tired of this, and they go and watch the Netflix equivalent of golf or MotoGP or football or whatever, that they don't desert the sport, that we've done enough to retain them. If we've done that, I think it's been an absolutely fantastic season. Even without that, it's certainly been thrilling.
Yeah, Formula One's certainly in rude health as we look to 2023, but that's just about all the time we have for this podcast, and that wraps up the 2022 season. And we will be back in a week or so's time with a full review of the 2022 season. But until then, Dieter, all that remains for me to say is thank you so much, as usual, for your insight for the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix and for the season as a whole. And we'll, of course, be looking forward to hearing your views on this season the next time we do the podcast.
Absolutely. And I'd also like to thank all our listeners and our readers for following us. Without you, we wouldn't even be here. We wouldn't have been able to go to races, etc. So a very, very big thank you to our readers, to our listeners, of course, to yourself, Michael, and everybody else who's been involved in the production of these podcasts. Thank you very, very much indeed. It's been a wonderful year, a wonderful season, and a great pleasure to have been here. Thank you.